Welcome to Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host, Abby.
And if you're new to our podcast, David and I are two super fans from totally different generations that take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that unites us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show.
And so we are up and rolling into our third season of the podcast, and we just really wanted to take a minute to say a very sincere thank you for being a listener. It's an absolute joy for David and I to do this podcast together. It just allows us to celebrate the show we love so much with all our fellow fans and can't think of anything better than that. And so we're just so glad you're enjoying the show and we really appreciate your listenership.
And we recently learned that we've had over 10,000 listens to our podcast. So
Wow,
that's very fun to know.
very cool. So today we're going to be talking about another season 5 episode, and that is The Bottom of Mel Cooley's Heart. And as you'll see in this episode, there's a lot of talking, not a lot of action, but it is a great one, and that we really get to focus on Mel, and Richard Deacon really gets a chance to shine, both comedically and dramatically, I think.
Season 5, episode 19 is when this episode aired. It was written by a gentleman by the name of John Whedon, who wasn't a name that you saw often. Although in doing some research, I discovered that he actually wrote 7 episodes of the show.
I was surprised by that too.
They included Where You Been, Fastbinder, The Night the Roof Fell In, Turtles, Ties, and Toreadors, the third one from the left, Scratch My Car and Die, and Viva Petri. I thought it was interesting that he was the same writer for Turtles, Ties, and Toreadors with Maria and Viva Petri with our bullfighter.
Yes, very cool. And these episodes really span like season 1, season 2, season 3, season 5. Like they're all spread out, So he was really
Yes.
coming back, now and then to do these things, which is kind of cool.
And Whedon also wrote for other shows like Donna Reed, The Andy Griffith Show, That Girl, Room 222, and also did 6 episodes of The Magical World of Disney. So quite a listing of credits that he had to.
Yeah, absolutely. He went to Harvard and he was into like their humor writing and it kind of led him into those radio comedies like the 30s and the 40s. And then he was really kind of one of those early writers that was helping to shape the early sitcom style. So like coming like out of radio, transitioning to TV writing, kind of adapting the pacing and the dialogue styles and all that as it evolved. So very cool, kind of on the cusp of that transition.
This episode is directed by Jerry Paris, no surprise to us. Written by Whedon on August 10th, 1965. Revised on December 17th, 1965. Filmed a few days before Christmas on December 21st, 1965. And eventually airing on February 9th, 1966.
And this was actually just a few episodes before Bad Reception in Albany, which was the last episode that we did, which is kind of
Right.
interesting.
So it's usually our norm. We start off with a synopsis from the show. Abby, do you have any for this episode?
Yeah, I have a couple of really quick ones. This one is Mel loses his job after Rob convinces him to stand up to Alan Brady's bullying. And then I also have Mel Cooley takes Rob Petrie's advice and stands up to Alan Brady and is promptly fired.
Here's what I have. After Alan's devastating public tongue lashing, Rob
That's
talks
great.
Mel into standing up for himself, which succeeds in getting Mel fired.
That's a
Isn't
good
that
one.
interesting, right?
Tongue
And then
lashing.
when Mel gets in trouble because of a script change, Rob encourages him to stand up for himself, but the advice backfires and Mel loses his job.
Yeah, that was a good one.
What I think is unique about this episode is it's probably the only episode that really features Richard Deacon over the course of the entire 5 years.
He gets a few moments to shine here and there, the ventriloquist, he gets some moments, but this one's really just full Richard Deacon spotlight.
And it is a nice tribute to Deke, as they called him, right?
Yeah,
To
yeah.
really give him an opportunity to shine a little bit. And he does.
Yeah, because really a lot of times he's relegated to sort of the like, yes, Alan, okay, Alan, and
Shut
that
up,
kind of
Mel.
yeah,
Yeah.
shut up. Yeah. And so he doesn't get a ton to do sometimes. So it's nice seeing him like, oh, he has this huge range in him that I didn't know that he had. That's kind of what it feels like.
So Deacon actually went to Ithaca College, which is kind of fun for me. It's about 3 hours from where I live.
That's
And I don't know
cool.
if they went to the same time, but Gavin MacLeod, who played, of course, Maxwell Cooley on a Dick Van Dyke episode and later was with Mary Tyler Moore
Hmm.
Murray on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, also went to Ithaca College. I don't know if their time overlapped there or not, but
Interesting.
in some correspondence with MacLeod, he mentioned the fact that he and Deacon had gone to Ithaca College. So
Hmm.
that's sort of a fun aside, if you will.
I think I also read that he went to was in the same high school as Rod Serling. Is that
Yes.
something? Yeah, which is
Yeah.
very cool.
Which again, I think was in the Ithaca
Yeah,
area.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
Deacon is listed as having been in 82 episodes of the Dick Van Dyke Show. I didn't independently confirm that, but I would say, that's half or more.
Yeah,
Also known as Fred Rutherford on Leave It to
leave it
Beaver,
to Beaver.
sort of at the same time. They were overlapping a bit, but he was on Jack Benny. In
Yeah,
later years, he was on The Mothers-in-Law, the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour.
yeah.
Over the course of time, Danny Thomas, Perry Mason, and the Pruitts of Southampton with Phyllis Diller, interestingly
Oh,
enough.
cool. And also in films, and like some big ones. The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock's, 63 movie, and
A
then
great scene standing in the
so
elevator in The
good,
Birds.
so good. Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956, and that one as well. Just, I mean, they're like minor roles in those films, but they're huge films.
And the Invasion of the Body Snatchers was some of the inspiration for Carl Reiner to do the Walnut
For
episode,
Walnut,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very cool.
So little overlap there. And then a couple of other films more directly related to Dick Van Dyke Show cast. Deacon was in the film that Maury did called Don't Worry, We'll Think of a Title with Rosemary. And
Listeners, if you haven't seen this movie, check it out. It is the weirdest to watch. It's got all your favorite cast members doing some crazy comedy stuff. It is weird as heck. So check it out if you haven't.
and Deacon was also in Reiner's film Enter Laughing, Carl's novel that was turned into a
Yeah,
stage production, but also a film.
just wonderful.
And in later years, of course, Deacon got known for writing a microwave cookbook.
I think he has a couple, I want to say maybe two. I don't remember. Maybe they were just versions of the same one, but yeah, microwave cooking.
Do you have one?
I do. I
I
do.
do. I have one
Yeah.
here on my shelf too. And actually, I think I've tried some of the recipes,
Oh,
stuffed
cool.
mushrooms and different things.
Fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, he got really into the microwave craze, I guess. That would have been about the time they were hitting the shelves, 70s.
This particular episode opens in the office. Buddy and Rob enter, and you can see they're in a state of disbelief.
And the dreary music that's playing.
Yes, Hagen's theme that definitely underscores the sentiment. But Buddy says that he feels so sorry for Mel, the bald-headed baboon.
And he's emphasized that I feel sorry for Mel. So we know, like, oh, something horrible's happened.
And Rob just remarks, Alan Brady is a monster.
Now we have this great little narrative device that comes in, which is as they're talking, Sally's going to arrive late and kind of be the audience for us. So she's done this before. Like, do you remember the one where they're playing poker and she comes in having been to the dog show, and then
Yes.
all the characters then get to explain to her what has happened. And that's for our sake, is the audience. So we have that same device here, which is fun. She's kind of the surrogate audience member, so she comes in late.
And basically says, what's going on with the show? And Buddy says, wait. He says, Alan Brady exploded. I was shocked. And I'm shock proof. Like, poor Mel. Until he says, poor Mel from you, buddy?
Yeah. Yeah, Rob says, well, he showed his true self in front of the sponsors and the entire cast. Alan did. Kind of makes it seem like Rob kind of doesn't believe Alan's a good dude. He knows he's kind of, his pleasant persona is largely kind of an act a little bit. But yeah, so Sally's kind of, oh, what happened? She's kind of got the gossip at first. And then, like you said, when Buddy says poor Mel, then her tone changes like, wait a minute, you're saying poor Mel? What happened? She's like, tell me the details.
Well, Rob and Buddy go on to explain that Mel somehow goofed up the running order of the show, and Alan entered the nightclub wearing a wetsuit with all these girls in evening gowns, right? And Alan blew his top, and Buddy says, toupee and all.
And I will say, do you know how in October Eve you're certain, like, you've seen Mary Tyler Moore's like nude painting or the boat in the Betty Lou? I can see this image perfectly of like the nightgown, the evening gowns in the nightclub and him walking into the scuba thing. It's like I've already seen it somehow. Can picture it perfectly.
I think there are a number of things like that in the show that, yes, fans swear they saw the painting.
Yeah. I swear the boat. Always the boat for me. Yeah.
Rob says Alan bludgeoned Mel.
Yeah. Instead of laughing it off, he just, exploded.
Called him Mr. Deadhead, called him Mr. Relative. Rob tried to stand up for Mel, but Buddy says then Alan went after Rob.
Yeah.
Mel was just like a broken toy.
It's like his mouth was moving, but no words came out.
With that, there's a knock on the door, and in comes Mel, very downtrodden, very
Yeah.
subdued, and asks, to speak with Rob. And Rob says, "Sure, Mel." And he said, "Well, no, Rob, this is private." And I love this little exchange. Rob and Mel leave, and the door closes.
Yeah.
And Buddy says, looks like Mel's got a big problem. Sally says, I think he just gave it to Rob.
And as since we're in season 5, this has happened many times where Rob has had somebody's brought a problem to him and it now becomes Rob's problem. So we've seen that many times. We only need that little line from Sally to be like, oh, here we go.
Mm.
So scene 2, we're now in the Petrie living room. Essentially, Rob's back from work. He's sitting at the table. He's gluing a broken vase back together. And Laura's sort of walking through the room, bringing the coffee. And I just want to say, as the scene starts, for me, there's a very clear season 5 visual marker, and that is that Laura's hairstyle is a very specific hairstyle for season 5. If you don't know what episode you're in, if you look to her hair, you usually can tell. The early season, she's got that real Jackie Kennedy, like kind of, fluffy bouffant kind of thing. And then it sort of starts heading more towards like the more here it's more of the mod style, the sort of like Vidal Sassoon, like, bob thing that's like the geometric bangs and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of like shifting towards that 60s fashion. So I could always tell season 5, like, oh, there's that bob.
That's true. Laura's, many fans will say, oh, that couldn't be that season because
Yeah.
her hairstyle wasn't
Yeah.
like that.
Looks lovely in all of them.
So Rob is attempting, as you said, to glue a vase as he explains to Laura the terrible scene that evolved at the office that day. And Rob, was using glue to take this handle or whatever, right? And says, I wish I could take some of this glue to the office and put Mel back together again. Now, what I think is interesting of this is Dick is presented with the scene from the writers to be able to excel in just this subtle but really great physical comedy because it's all about the glue, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
supposedly he not been cautious with the glue and got it on his fingers. Now he gets his fingers stuck together, and it just gives him that opportunity to give that little. Again, we've opened the scene, and it's all about Mel, but this little offshoot takes us somewhere, and as viewers, we enjoy it.
Totally. And you almost get excited when you see that he's working with glue because you're like, what's he going to do with this? You almost can tell he's going to do something.
Well, Laura remarks about Alan's vicious behavior, and Rob says, well, how can you ask for respect for somebody else? He acknowledges that perhaps they could help do something to try to build Mel's confidence up.
They start kind of talking a little bit about Mel's identity over the years, too. Rob and Laura talking about how Buddy's insults, haven't been very kind. And, Rob feels a little guilty about it. But, that he always assumed that this sort of gave Mel an identity, that he actually kind of liked it. And Laura, kind of the voice of reason, is like, well, I doubt that, And so Rob's, still gluing the handle onto the vase as they're talking. And then he asks Laura, hey, can you time me? I gotta set this glue for 2 minutes. I gotta hold this here. And as he's holding it, the phone rings.
So Laura answers the phone and, oh, who is it but Alan? And as soon as she says Alan, Rob's from across the room, like shaking his head, like, I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to talk to him. And Laura's doing her best to try to avoid it. But in the end, she like brings the phone over to Rob and eventually puts the phone to Rob's ear, or let's say she starts to put it there. Yeah. And again, this is a great thing. And he said, no, I'm left-eared.
There's always that left-handed thing going on. Makes it funnier.
These are just, to me, some subtleties that we as fans latch onto. And if you were to talk about this episode, somebody will mark about the phone scene with the vase and the glue, and particularly the antics with the phone and what ear it is.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to it being season 5 is like they're so comfortable with those characters. They know all those little subtle things. They're just part of the character now, and they just come out naturally.
Rob talks with Alan on the phone about Mel, and
can I just say I do love how he starts the phone call like we know Alan's like mid rant because Rob just goes, huh? Like that's how he starts talking to him. Huh? Oh, I wasn't defending. When he picked up the phone, Alan must have just been completely like mid, argument already.
Of course, there's no one on the other end of that line, which makes it even better.
Yes, incredible.
Right? We've talked numerous times about Dick's ability with these one-sided phone conversation, and here is yet just another example of that.
And so good at it here. So on the phone, he's trying to tell Alan I wasn't defending him and, yada, yada. And then he says, Alan brings up the name Fred Fracken. It's the first time we're hearing that. And Rob kind of reacts immediately. So the audience, we know like, oh, this isn't good, that this other guy's name is being mentioned. He kind of looks to Laura, gives a worried look for, like, yeah, Fred Fracken, who? Okay, yeah. Rob says, yeah, I know him. I worked with him, but I don't know him that well. But it becomes kind of clear to us that Alan might be considering somebody as a replacement producer at this point. And so Rob tells him he'll let him know if he thinks of anyone else. And he tells Laura, hey, hang me up. So he hangs him up.
With this conversation, though, like you said, he looks at Laura and he comes to the realization that he says, as far as Mel's concerned, we're going to have to go in for a full scale renovation of Mel, which is quite a way to characterize it.
Rob is kind of playing the universe bargaining game, as I call it. So he's got this. He says, "Have you ever had this strange little superstition when you're a kid where you say like I'm doing something, and if this thing goes well, then everything's going to be all right with whatever the problem is, kind of thing." And she says, "Yeah, I know what that is." And so he's like, "I'm going to do that with the vase." So he's holding the handle, and he kind of closes his eyes and he goes, if this sticks, everything is going to be all right with Mel. He releases, but when he releases, the handle of the vase just continues on in his hand. It's not even remotely glued to the vase. It comes completely off. Not a good sign going forward.
Now, I will say, I relate to that. This whole premise of if this happens, then that means this.
Yeah.
I did that as a kid for sure.
Oh, yeah. I'd probably still do it. Very superstitious. But not a good sign that it didn't stick. So then we're heading into the writer's room again. I assume it's the next day. And this is where Rob is kind of pacing the room, explaining to Buddy and Sally about, what Alan said about Fred Fracken and that, he's worried that they're going to be brought in to replace Mel.
Interestingly, though, Buddy, in the midst of all of this, continues to just insult Mel, say bad things about Mel.
As they're trying to maybe build him up, yeah.
Buddy just can't help himself. And Rob says, "Buddy, will you knock it off?" And Sally's like, "Yeah, we've got to do the right thing here."
Yeah, we're destroying his ego here.
Rob says they need to do something, and they've got to go to Mel and not expect Mel to come to them, but go to him and invite him out for lunch.
What I find interesting is Buddy says, well, if you're a person of comedy, you're going to rib people. You're going to make fun of other people. You got to learn to take it kind of thing. And Rob explains, which again is maybe a look into Carl's mind of sort of like dignified and professional person. Rob says, yeah, but there's a difference between friendly ribbing and like humiliating someone in public, and if you have any decency about you, you learn to control when you do that and when you don't do that. And I thought that was really a good lesson from Rob there.
While this discussion is going on, Buddy can't, Dick says we have to help build Mel's ego, and Buddy says, well, put his picture in the post office. And then they talk about going out to lunch, and Buddy says, forget the lunch, take him to a plastic surgeon to put a new face on him. Let's get the jerk in here. So Sally and Rob both sort of are saying, come on, Buddy, it's about time that you support Mel instead of continuing to tear him down.
I think Sally, too, she said, get them all out, let's have it. Get it all out of your system.
As they're departing the office, Rob sort of looks at Sally and he says to her, okay, Sal, you're in charge of Buddy's mouth. If he opens it, stick a buttered roll in it.
My favorite line, you're like a bad little kid as they're going out of the office.
This episode was one of the few of the Dick Van Dyke Show that have been colorized through the years. This episode actually did not air until after Carl Reiner's passing. I believe it aired in 2021. And I think perhaps
the colorized, you mean? Yeah.
Right. There had been plans underway to do this. And then as a tribute to Carl, this along with Baby Fat came out a few months after, or the following year after Carl passed away. Interestingly, in the colorized version, this scene in the office of Buddy's constant sort of badgering of Mel and whatever is what got cut out for what was actually shown on air. And I've read some discourse online from some fans who felt like they understand stuff has to get cut out.
Yeah. Of all the scenes, though, in this episode,
this context really gets lost.
Yeah.
Particularly about the buttered roll and all that.
Because that comes up about every 10 seconds for the rest of the lunch scene.
In our restaurant scene, yes.
Yeah, very crucial. So that's interesting. You wonder who makes those decisions in the end. I don't know if it's editors or whoever, or probably a combination of forces that come together and decide what gets cut. But I feel like almost the fans should be consulted. Yeah, like, hey, what should be cut here? I mean, and you still get the scene with it, but it's just 10 million times funnier with the roles in there, and you know why it's happening. So
well, and for those of us fans who have watched the episodes many times, you immediately notice that's missing.
Yeah.
Some fans have said to me that they can't watch the versions of the episodes being edited now that we've been afforded the opportunity to see them uncut on the Blu-rays and DVDs and
I get that.
things like that.
Scene 4 opens up in the restaurant. They're all having lunch together, all sitting in a big booth. Rob and Mel on one side, Sally and Buddy on the other. And everyone's a little awkward, I think, because, they don't usually socialize like this. This isn't something they do. They hang out at parties and things like that together, but the sort of one-on-one with Mel is kind of unusual. So,
And as our scene opens up, we should pause and say, again, like we have often in the past shared, we had a draft copy of the script, which shows us or reveals to us that some of the dialogue at the top of the scene actually either didn't make it to the final cut or got excised during the filming. Abby and I thought that we would share some of what happened ahead of where the scene actually picks up when we see it in the episode. What happens initially in the draft, as we're describing, is they arrive at the restaurant and a waiter pulls out the table away from the booth so Sally can slide in. And she turns to Mel and she says, "Here, Mel, slide in here." And she pats the seat and she says, "There you are. Are you comfy?" And Mel says, "Well." And Rob says, "That's right. Curry favor with the boss." And Buddy says, "There's one thing I hate." Sally immediately says, "Have a roll."
Buddy says, "Curry, I hate curry. I have a right to hate curry, even if the boss likes it." And Sally says, "Well, he's not my boss. He's my luncheon date," to Mel. "Hey, date, how about a raise?"
Mel says, "If it were up to me." Buddy says, "Come on, Mel. We know who holds the purse strings."
Says they sit quietly for a moment, uneasy. Waiter enters. "Well, look who's here." This is Sally. Rob says, "The waiter." Buddy says, "Hi, waiter." Waiter says, "Would you care for a drink?"
Rob says, "Mel, a martini?" And Mel says, "Oh, Rob, you know my rule," sort of putting up his hand. Rob says, "Mel, it's my rule too, but..." Sally says, "Just for today, let's all break it."
And Buddy says, "4 martinis on the rocks." And Mel says, "Rob, maybe you're right." Orders 4 martinis for everybody, not 4, just 1 for each. 4, haha, like he's trying to order 4 for himself. Maybe the waiter says, "Yes, sir," and the waiter leaves.
Now, the waiter here is played by Johnny Silver.
Yes, seeing
who,
him
course,
again.
Of course, we all know.
Which, by the way, I looked on IMDb. He is not listed in the episode. Not even as uncredited. He's not in. I'm gonna have to fix that because I feel like he should be in there.
Here, he would have said something had the dialogue remained, but because it was cut out.
You'd still think he would be in the credits as sort of like, waiter, or, even if he didn't have a line, because I know that it said that Abdullah is in the scene here, which I don't know where he's at, but and he didn't have a line, so I feel like they should. I don't know why he's not listed in there, so that's a shame.
This scene would have led us into where it actually picked up in the final version of the episode, and sort of where they're all looking at each other and they say, how this is very sort of pleasant to get together, and why don't we do this more often?
And Mel kind of breaks the ice, he kind of starts bringing up the rehearsal disaster that happened. And he jokes like, yesterday you saw why a producer goes gray before his time, or loses his hair, and he kind of goes to Buddy because he's waiting for the baldy joke, and then Buddy starts to say something and Sally immediately pushes the bread basket toward him. "Here, why don't you have a buttered roll?" like don't even start.
Again, it's a little uneasy, but Rob finally turns and he says, "Well, Mel, the reason that we asked you to come to lunch today," and ultimately there's a little back and forth, but Sally ultimately says, it's just that we love you. And she leans over and gives Mel a kiss on the cheek.
And I think that was really special because I know just from you, David, and just reading things and listening to Rosemary, that her and Deke, as she called him, they were very, very close. And so you could see that here when she gives him that kiss. It just kind of made me think like, oh yeah, I can see their love for each other, through those characters. But especially, I know she mentioned that when her Rosemary's husband passed,
right,
that Richard was right there, very supportive, almost like a brother, she said, taking her, coming to her aid whenever she needed, which is really sweet.
And was very protective of her on the set, making sure that people didn't say things that he thought would upset her. But I think you're right. You can see the relationship there, I think.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
The real relationship through that.
Definitely. Johnny comes with the I guess they're martinis, and Sally suggests a toast, and she says, "Let's raise our glasses, to Mel." And Buddy starts to speak again. He says, "To Mel," and Sally just pushes the bread at him again. Just don't even start. Like, all these opportunities are coming up.
Yeah, eat your bread, she says. And Rob says, raises his glass, "Mel, to a long and happy association." And Sally says, "Drink up, Skål."
Yes, I was going to ask you what that was.
Skål is a traditional Scandinavian toast, meaning cheers or to your health, often used during celebrations, holidays, and social gatherings. And it basically is a symbol of community, warmth, and friendship, and is used to salute others while drinking. So
that's cool.
That was not in the script. So
yeah.
did Rosemary ad-libbed that and they just kept it in.
Yeah, is that something she usually did when she toasts things? I don't know. Very cool though.
Mel goes on to say, well, it has been a long and happy association, but I'm not sure how long it's going to last. And Rob says, well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. And immediately it's like a nerve hits Mel. He goes, you've heard something.
Yeah. What have you heard? And Rob's trying to reassure him, hey, we haven't heard anything. So Sally says, well, what Alan did to you, was inexcusable. And Mel actually starts to defend Alan, which I think was interesting. Alan was well within his rights to take me to task. And, we must make allowances for the artist's temperament. And I thought that was kind of interesting to see, here we are in 1965. And just considering all the, kind of movements that are happening in today's world, sort of calling out, abusive types of people and stars who are abusive to people and we're kind of not falling for like the artist temperament anymore excuse, kind of thing. So it's interesting to see that in 65, in the 60s, Rob, Sally, Buddy, and Laura, they're all on that side of things already, even that early on of like, no, let's not make excuses for this person. This is not acceptable. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
And again, Buddy, who is ready to utter something at any given moment, blurts out, you're better than that Fred Fradkin any day.
He's just the best in a crisis, isn't he? Always says the worst thing.
Mel's like, Fred Fradkin, what are you talking to him about? What do you mean? And Rob sort of tries to assuage the discussion and says, Mel, we need to give you more credit. But the more Buddy comments, the more Sally continues to feed him rolls out of the basket.
Here, try the pumpernickel.
And as we watch the scene, Mel is continuing to really start to down that martini. Not only his, but Rob's alongside and Sally's.
I didn't notice that till many years after I first, I haven't noticed that maybe 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, this is hilarious. Everybody's is going down as the scene goes on.
They're all going down at Mel, right?
Yes.
Rob says, Mel, Alan Brady is never going to respect you until you stand up to him and stop taking the stuff that he's been handing to you. Rob says, all I know is if you stand up to him, he'll back down.
And we really get to see Richard Deacon here. He had to play like dejected, and then now he's playing kind of awkward friendship kind of thing, and now he's getting to play tipsy. He's got the drunk slur kind of. I mean, it's just he's so good at it. It's unbelievable. And when I saw it, I was so sorry he didn't get to do those things more often in the show because he was just brilliant at it.
Rob finally has convinced Mel that Mel needs to stand up to Alan, and Mel pushes his way out of the restaurant booth and says, I'm going to do what I should have done 15 years ago when he didn't invite me to my own sister's wedding. And Buddy says, while you're at it, belt your sister.
He storms off and says my favorite line, I'm reborn. This is hilarious delivery. And he's kind of stumbling out of the restaurant.
As he's making that final departure, he grabs Buddy's martini, downs that, and I don't know if you've noticed, but when he puts that glass back down, he puts it down so hard, he snaps the stem on the glass.
Yes, and it just falls right over,
breaks on the table.
But great, because, now he's got this liquid courage, so now we're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? Because he's going up there, but he's got a false sense of confidence right now, so I'm not sure what's going to happen.
As the scene finishes here at the restaurant, Rob looks at the other two and says, well, what do you think? And Sally says, I think he's a little fish magic. Which was literally written in the script.
Yes. Hilarious.
I did some research on that, thinking that was of some Yiddish origin.
Yeah, I assumed it was.
There's a lot of discussion online about it, but no one actually said they're sure of what it means, right? A little tipsy, a little drunk.
Yeah.
But no one had ever really used that expression in day-to-day stuff.
Interesting.
Rob says, I think we need to get back there and back him up. A man's life is at stake.
And Buddy says, yeah, I know, I'm starving to death. So Sally, I love how Sally gives him the basket of rolls to take with him, like a little snack on the way. So he's clutching this basket of rolls the whole time. So
we returned to the office, and I was just going to point out what you said is I never noticed Buddy carrying that basket of rolls until very recently.
It's just hilarious.
What I actually noticed was later in the scene, he was eating a roll, and I thought, where did he get that roll from? And then I went back and realized that when he returned, he has it, and the basket of rolls is sitting on the desk in the office.
So funny. He does a lot with that basket of rolls, even when they're at the lunch, there's a lot going on there. He's picking out the raisin bread. I mean, it's hilarious. Just what a good way to master a prop. So now we're back in the writer's room, and Mel's on the phone with Alan, and Mel's, tipsy, drunk, and he's telling Alan he's going to come up there and confront him. Buddy and Sally and Rob walk in on this, and they're excited for him. They kind of start egging him on, like, "Yeah, that's the spirit, Mel. Go for it," kind of thing.
Mel says, I want to see you now, Alan, right? And like you said, the group encourages him, and Mel exits, sort of bouncing off the door
Oh,
as he departs.
the funniest physical comedy Richard Deacon's ever done, I swear. The way he's sort of like scrunched up and he's bouncing off it's like a pinball, he's just going bouncing off things on the way out.
He
It's
truly
just a riot.
ricochets off the
Yes,
door, right?
yes.
And the three of them look at each other and they discuss that they should follow Mel up there to listen. And they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't all go. Rob says he will go and pretends that he's tying his shoelaces. And Buddy says, you're wearing loafers. And Rob says, that's why I have to pretend.
So that leaves Buddy and Sally alone in the writer's room, and they kind of have an exchange about what they think's going to happen. They're waiting for Rob to get back. And Buddy says, I think Alan's going to give him like a look, and Mel's just going to crumble, kind of right there. And Sally jokes like, yeah, Mel only has courage because he put it in him, and she does sort of like drinking sign. Rob enters. And he says, you guys should come up. You should hear him. Mel's magnificent. Alan can't get a word in edgewise. Come on, come join me and we'll go listen. Just as they're exiting, Mel comes rushing back in.
And says, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. They're all excited. And they said, yes. And he fired me. He fired me. The group is literally stunned. They just can't believe that was the outcome of what happened upstairs.
So we're left with the cliffhanger of like, wait a minute, he went up and said what he needed to say and he got fired. What the heck happened there? Now we're back in the writer's room when the commercial comes back, but Mel's gone now. So I don't know how that turned out, if he just decided to leave. I don't know, but the three of them are now in the writer's room again, Buddy, Sally, and Rob, and they're kind of going back and forth about what do we do about this? He got fired, and what are the different takes on this? And Buddy immediately tries to distance himself from the situation, which he usually does.
Yeah.
He says, "Well, it's not like we had anything to do with him getting fired." And Rob's like, "Yeah, it is. It's exactly what happened." And Rob says, "And if they had any decency or guts, they'd go straight to Alan and say, if Mel goes, then we go," kind of thing.
Sally sort of looks at him and concurs, right? So they're like, all right, well, let's go. Rally themselves. They head out the office door. And a few seconds pass as the camera just holds the open office door. And with that, they sort of like stroll back in and say, well, probably wouldn't accomplish anything anyway. So as quickly as they wanted to support Mel, yes, they've given more thought to that. Yeah.
Sally says, well, what's your excuse from coming back to Buddy? And Buddy says, I don't like him. But Rob is saying, he still feels responsible. He was the one that kind of pushed him to do this. And Sally says, no, we're in it too. And then Buddy, again, trying to distance himself. No, we're off the hook. Shh, don't say any more, kind of thing to Sally.
Yeah. He says, that it's all Rob's fault. And Sally says, do you know what you are? And Buddy says, yes, but I've learned to live with it.
I love that line. It's interesting because, Buddy will say these things, but in the end, that he's going to probably be there for Mel, on some level. Like, he can't admit it, really, and he's got to make some cracks about it, but, he would be there. So then we dissolve to the Petrie house again, and they're having dinner, in the dining area. But Rob is on the phone during dinner, and he sounds like he's discussing, with Sally or Buddy, whoever, possible ways to fix the situation that they've gotten Mel into. Somebody on the phone mentions blackmail, and we know right away it's probably Buddy. So he rejects that idea, and kind of back and forth. Just call me back when you have a better idea, kind of thing. Kind of hangs up. So he's just having this back and forth with them on the phone, trying to figure out what the heck they're going to do.
He hangs up the phone, and Laura says, Rob, you probably just should have stayed at the office. And remarks, you don't even know what you ate for dinner.
And Rob confidently says, well, sure I do. It was steak. A little well done, but it was good.
To which Laura says, Rob, they were lamb chops.
And he says, well, in that case, they were perfect.
So Rob continues, do we have any dessert?
Oh, this is the best part.
Yeah, Laura says, you ate it. Rob says, what was it? And Laura says, Bavarian cream pie. Oh, darn, I love that, he says.
Is there any more? She goes, darling, you had 2 helpings. And he goes, oh, darn, why didn't you tell me? That's the greatest line. Why didn't you tell me?
So ancillary to the storyline, but it just adds some more levity and fun to the episode, because I think as a husband and wife, you relate to that banter that happens between you and your spouse, right? Or your partner.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, it was just hilarious. And then so Laura says, well, think you were too busy reassuring Mel that everything would be fine to, taste what was going on. And Rob says, yeah, well, how could I taste anything with a lie like that in my mouth?
Well, Laura continues and says to Rob, you have to talk to Alan. And Rob's sort of inside out. And he says, the thing is, Mel is just a pest and a fusspot. And he whines and he worries about all these details and more. And all of a sudden, it dawns on Rob, wait a minute. It's for those very things that those actually are positive qualities, solid reasons why Mel should actually keep his job. And Rob says, Mel is the world's leading pest producer.
And so he gets this epiphany, and now he knows what he's going to say to Alan, because we've revealed that Mel is about to come in the next day to clean out his desk. That he's been fired, he's cleaning out his desk. So we have that sort of like time thing where we got to fix this before he cleans out his desk for the day, kind of thing. So we're in the writer's room the next day, and Rob is explaining his plan to Buddy and Sally, and he says, unless I have a better idea, they should come with him to Alan's office, and they're going to argue for Mel's job. And he's got these points now he can make about this kind of thing.
And Buddy says, he's only got 1 point, and if he wears a hat, nobody will notice.
And Sally says, well, the show's in trouble without a producer. And Buddy jokes, yeah, who would I insult? And Sally says, well, they could get a hairy producer. And Buddy says, and leave me with the trunk full of baldy jokes?
Yeah.
So he's still getting them out. He's still got them.
Rob points out again the whole conversation about Fred Fradkin, and they discuss what a negative that would be if they had Fred Fradkin producing, or even if Alan took over the responsibility, what a disaster that would be.
I think the straw that broke the camel's back was envisioning Alan producing the show and being saying, oh my goodness, we can't have that.
So the three do agree that they have to go to Alan and lobby for keeping Mel as the producer.
Sally warns Buddy, let Rob do all the talking. And Sally says, you keep your mouth shut, kind of thing. So Rob says he'll play it by ear. And she says, good, I trust your ear more than Buddy's mouth. Then they make their way up to the office.
At this point, the scene opens and we see Alan behind his desk, the desk is in a state of disarray. Everything is all over.
This might be one of the best Carl Reiner office scenes of Alan, I think. I mean, it's akin to the one with the coast to coast big mouth. It's very, very funny.
Alan is frantically trying to find glue for his toupee. He can't find it. He's calling for Marge. She's nowhere to be found.
There's papers everywhere.
Finally, he takes the toupee off and puts it on a styrofoam head.
It's kind of becoming obvious that Mel would normally be handling all of these details that are now just ruining the entire office. Everything's in disarray. It's become clear that without Mel, Alan can't function. And I think Alan is realizing it too, but doesn't want to admit it.
Alan goes to his office door to look for Marge, and when he opens the door, he finds Rob, Buddy, and Sally standing at the door. They sort of come in, and Alan says, well, what do you want? What do you want? Does it have anything to do with Mel? And Rob says, no, yeah. And Alan says, well, I don't want to talk about it. And Rob says, well, Alan, I've worked here long enough that I think you owe it to me to listen. Alan says, yeah. I don't owe anybody anything. And
I would say just that Carl and Dick work off each other. It's the chemistry is unreal in these like one-on-ones with him. Oh, so amazing. You'll see.
And not only the dialogue, but the expressions and the movements.
Yes. Oh, so good.
So Rob begins to try to make his case, and he's smart enough to butter Alan up a little bit. Alan, you have the impatience of a genius, and you can sort of see Alan soften a little when Rob's calling him a genius. And Rob goes on to try to convince Alan that the fact that Mel is a pest is really why they need him. Because of all those things that Mel takes care of, he's an important part of the producer.
I just want to go back a little bit. Rob's kind of flattering Alan a little bit. And it's like each little flattery, he kind of softens a little bit more, and he'll say, so, well, you're demanding because you have high standards. Like, you just want an extra minute kind of thing. And then he's like, okay, so Rob keeps talking. And then he says, well, you're impatient. He says, what? You have the impatience of genius, Well, and then I think Carl's best line is he hears that and he goes, go ahead, finish your thought kind of thing.
At some point he says, you earned another 30 seconds or something.
He's just very, very easily manipulated as a person with like just vanity.
Alan says, well, you guys make me feel like Captain Bligh. Do you really want Mel back? He asks Rob, Mr. Christian. And Rob says, yeah. And Buddy says, so does Mr. Jewish.
Love that line. Rob's done a good thing here. He's framed all of Mel's attributes as virtues, that he's, a whipping boy, but he absorbs the anger meant for others, and he's a brother-in-law, and he's guarding all these things are set up to be good. And so Alan kind of finally relents and he says, okay, Mel can come back. But he kind of refuses to admit to Rob that he's the one that convinced him. Instead, he claims, like, well, I just need someone to clean up all this mess. That's why he's coming back, kind of thing. So he's very, very vain. He cannot admit this.
And a little earlier, Alan says, you wouldn't believe it. The other day, Mel came in here with a snootful and tried to tell me off. Whose idea was that? And Buddy immediately says, oh, that was Rob's.
Always there to throw you under the bus.
As you noted, Alan ultimately concedes to let Mel come back to work, as he just needs someone to clean up the office mess, to handle the mail, to get Marge to take care of his toupees.
His scrapbook.
And Alan says, I'm hungry. And Sally says, well, Alan, none of us have had anything to eat. He says, well, come on, let's get Marge and we'll get some food ordered. And as they're trying to reach Marge to place an order, we see Mel enter the rear of Alan's office from his office with his hat on, his coat, his briefcase, or whatever. And Mel says, well, I've come to say goodbye. And Alan sort of ignores the comment and looks at everybody and says, what do you guys want to eat? He says, I'll have corned beef. And Rob says, yeah, corned beef. Corned beef all around. So Alan directs Mel to get an order placed and to order something for himself. And Mel is sort of taken aback.
Alan keeps pushing the lunch order. Hey, Mel, why don't you take this order down, go get us sandwiches? And Mel says, well, are you trying to say I'm rehired? And Alan refuses. He says, no, I'm trying to avoid saying it.
It'll make me sick.
Yeah. So instead he tells him to go get the sandwiches. And Mel kind of pauses and we think like, uh-oh, is Mel going to stand up to him again? Is he not going to take this abuse again? Because he's done it once before. And so he asks kind of one final question. He says, Alan, there's just one more thing before I leave. And Alan says, what? And he says, do you want them on white bread or rye? So the group realizes Mel's back. And then, in perfect Alan form, he chastises Mel for thinking that they wanted corned beef on white bread. Like, how could he be so stupid to think? So he's immediately back to treating him like garbage the second he returns.
How he could possibly think that you would ever have a corned beef sandwich on white bread.
So we're in the final scene in the writer's room, and this is later on. Buddy, Sally, and Rob are kind of finishing up their work and planning to maybe go to a movie they're talking about, and Mel walks in. Buddy immediately resumes insulting Mel, per usual. And Rob notices suddenly that Mel has a black eye. And it's a little strange watching this in 2026, but I think it works, and we'll kind of see why in a minute. And Rob says, where did you get the black eye? And Mel says, Alan hit me. And Rob asks, well, then why are you smiling? And Mel proudly says, I hit him back. As if it sets it even. So now they've had this new relationship now where they punch each other, I guess. But Rob asks what Alan said in response to being punched, and Mel goes, ouch. So we get this wonderful, like, evening of the scores kind of like, yeah, we've leveled up, but now it's a little more even. It's an interesting scene watching it nowadays, but I think when he evens it up, it kind of makes it okay.
Mel says, this has been my day. In fact, I'll go to the movie with you. And he says, come on, little fellow. With that, putting his arm around Buddy again, in stark contrast to their typical relationship, and they exit the office, ending the scene.
Just a wonderful episode. You get to see all the interesting dynamics of friendships and work relationships and boss and, whipping boy kind of things. We get to see all these interesting dynamics and how they play out and how they complicate work and complicate friendships and things like that. And it was very interesting. And I like that we got to focus on Mel. You really got to see him in his comedy here, like his just shining, so bright. He has such comedic chops. He really gets to showcase him in this episode. And also like a lot of different emotions. He was drunk, he was somber, he was excited. There's just a lot for him to do. And he kind of nails all of it, in my opinion.
Deacon was just, I think, like we've talked before about other guest actors on the show, bit players.
Yeah.
Deacon's parts that he played are memorable. As small as they are, they make an indelible mark on whatever it is, whether it's the Van Dyke Show or Lucy Desi or the In-Laws, Leave It to Beaver. And he's so recognized from all the different roles that he has.
It helps, too, that he has a very tall stature and he's very unique looking, I think, which is also helps him out a little bit.
Sadly, Deacon died at only 62 years of age in August of 1984. From a heart attack.
What a shame.
What I learned through doing an interview with friends of Richard's back during the run of the Walnut Times was that Deacon was actually out in his garden and got
Hmm.
stung by a
Oh,
bee,
yes, I did read this. Yes.
which caused the heart attack. The combination, I guess, of an
Yeah.
anaphylactic shock on his system and the heart attack.
I mean, that is a real shame. That's way too young. Think of all the wonderful things he could have done on screen for us.
Certainly could have had a much longer career for
Yeah.
being only of
Yeah.
that age.
Thankfully, he blessed us with a lot of good stuff while he was here. Another thing I think we've talked about before, David, I don't know if it was a Carl Reiner interview or Rosemary, but we had read about that Richard was apparently like a very, very charitable person. And, we were talking about how he was so good to Rosemary when her husband passed and things like that. So it does make sense that he was like this, but apparently very charitable, but under the radar. Like no one knew he was charitable in that way until he passed. And, there was some kind of memorial service and all these people were coming out saying, he had done all these wonderful things for them, giving them money and time or whatever it was. And it was coming to light that, wow, this guy was doing a lot for people behind the scenes that no one knew about, which I think is really cool.
And as you say, the cast members who were so close to him on the show had no idea of his
Yeah.
generosity.
Yeah.
This episode, I think, is also fun because around the time of the shooting of this episode, TV Guide did an article, and it was while they were rehearsing the show. So we're fortunate to have some
Mm.
actual color shots
Oh, yeah.
of
Yes, I
the
have those.
cast rehearsing this episode with Dick in the office trying to convince Alan to keep Mel, and then other rehearsal shots. And it's kind of interesting
Mm.
to see in rehearsal the way the cast looked
Yeah, that's always fun.
and the colors of Alan's office and the way the rest of some of the sets look. Also, the scene of Rob and Laura with the repair to the vase, their color shots of those. So
Very cool.
photographer must have just taken shots and shots of what was going on during the rehearsal.
Yeah. And you should be able to find those online, those images somewhere. Those have been sold. The TV guides have been sold many times. So,
Well, I think that wraps us for today, Abby, unless you have a final thought.
no, no, what a wonderful episode. Really, really nice.
Yeah, we hope you've enjoyed our look back today at the bottom of Mel Cooley's heart.
And if you'd like to be notified when all our new episodes are released, just feel free to subscribe to our Tripping Over the Ottoman channel on YouTube. Our podcast is also available on all the major streaming platforms, so you can find us there as well.
We are a community and we value your comments, your questions, and the contributions that you have to the discussion surrounding the show. We had a lot of fun comments from our
Yes.
previous episode that we enjoy reading about. So feel free to leave some feedback on the YouTube channel or send an email to trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com. And we'd like to see the subject of Box 7030. That's a little tip off to us that we have some comments coming back. For today, I'm David.
And I'm Abby, and thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.